So, since this week is our first article analysis assignment, I wanted to go over my recommendations on how to read scientific papers, which seems like a little silly that I'm making a video on how to read, but scientific papers do have some odd formatting things that make reading them, or that make the optimal strategy for reading them a little bit different, given that it's sort of my job to read and write these. I thought I would give you some tips on how to effectively read scientific papers when you have a particular question that you'd like an answer to. So one really nice thing about reading scientific papers is that they all follow this same general outline. There's always something called an abstract, which is a brief summary of the paper. Then the actual paper itself has an introduction, which tells you the background, the methods, which tells you the specific details on how the study was actually done, the results, which are presented as best as you can without any interpretation, just the raw data, and then the discussion where the results are put in context of what the initial research question was. Now, I'm specifically talking about scientific papers that have undergone something called peer review, which is where other scientists will read and give feedback on and ask you to refine or revise or edit things in your study before it's published. So these kinds of publications fall into a different category that are generally more trusted than something that might just get published in a magazine or on a blog. Because the larger community of scientists has to look at this and vet it to make sure that it's actually up to snuff. So, how to read a scientific paper. I do not recommend reading it in order. That is a recipe for having a bad time. Here's how I recommend reading a scientific paper. Usually you'll have some question, right? Maybe what's an effective treatment for this particular injury? Should you do high rep, low weight lifts or the opposite for somebody who has been sedentary? You might be interested in high-intensity interval training for people with metabolic syndrome. All right, you have some question, right? Some question you want an answer to. So you'll go to your favorite search engine, maybe Google Scholar, do some searching for your topic of choice. You'll find a scientific paper. The first thing I recommend doing is read the abstract in detail, because the abstract is like 150 words maybe, and it's super short and it's really to the point. Quite often when I'm looking for something, some research question, some research topic, I skim through dozens of abstracts until I find what I'm interested in. Then, once you've found a paper to read, such as the one I've assigned you to read for this week, here's how I recommend actually looking at it. Number one, read the abstract again, because you might have missed something the first time you looked at it. So, number one, abstract. Read that in detail. Number two, read the introduction, and especially the first few paragraphs of the introduction, because that will put this topic in context and it will explain it to somebody who's not an expert. Then, number three, I would maybe skim, maybe skim the first 1 to 2 paragraphs of the methods. And I would not read the rest unless it's a topic that you are an expert on. And I'll show you what I mean with the paper for this week. Then I would do the same thing with the results. I would skim the first 1 to 2 paragraphs. And then I would read the discussion in detail. Because this is where the results are going to be put in a context that you can actually make some sense from. So let me tell you what I mean. Let me pull up the paper for this week, and I'll walk you through how, if I'd never seen this paper before, I might approach it. So here's the paper. I'm super excited about this because it came out last week. You'll notice it was accepted for publication, meaning it passed all those stages of peer review on the 4th of February, 2021. And this paper is about bone loss during space flight in astronauts. All right, so you go up to the International Space Station, you hang out there for 6 months, you come down, and your bone density goes down by a lot. So the assignment for this week is going to be to do an analysis of some of the data presented in this study. So let's put what I just described into practice. First thing, I would read the abstract. It's really short, and even the abstract has a little mini structure, right? Has a little introduction, it's got some methods, it's got some results, and it's got some little discussion of the results. So read this in detail. This will give you the most important information about the study. So then what did I say next? I said read the introduction. So the introduction is a whopping, 2 paragraphs right here. One thing you should maybe realize about top journals, like this is the British Journal of Sports Medicine, the page limits are pretty aggressive, and so you try and cram as much science into as little space as possible. But what that means is that it's very high density reading. So this introduction is a great introduction to why this study was done. So it's telling us that, for example, if you go up to the space station for 6 months, you lose the same amount of bone loss that an elderly person might lose in 10 years on Earth. And it even explains why that bone loss happens and suggests some of the things that are done right now to try to prevent bone loss and some of the rationale behind this study in particular. So we read the introduction. We have a good idea of the background and why we would want to maybe be interested in the study. And then let's skim 1 or maybe 2 paragraphs of the methods. So got 17 astronauts from a bunch of different countries. They were in space for a few months, and they took a vitamin D supplement in space. Now, you'll pretty quickly realize why I say skim the 1 to 2 paragraphs of the methods and don't read the rest of it, because very quickly we're into this extremely technical details about exactly what variables were measured, what software was used to analyze these measurements, all the different blood chemistry stuff they did, all the statistics. So let's skip all that, and instead let's take a look at the results. Now, I mentioned the results are generally presented without any interpretation whatsoever, which can be useful if you're a researcher trying to form your own opinion, but it can be very difficult if you don't have a great context for what's going on. So you'll probably be able to make sense of the first little bit of this, but all of these tables and these plots and this abbreviation can be kind of hard to follow. So this is why I recommend maybe skim 1 or 2 paragraphs of the results, but jump right to the discussion, which is down here, because it will tell you exactly what the most important findings in the study are. We observed substantial bone loss at the weight-bearing distal tibia over 3.5 to 7 months space missions. Right? And it gives you some very understandable descriptions of what that bone loss actually means, how they confirmed it, and then there's some really nice discussion of the most important findings of the study. And in fact, some journals even do these really convenient things for people in a hurry like you, that tells you what did the study find and how might it actually impact clinical practice in the future. You tend to see these things in more sports medicine focused journals as opposed to maybe more like hard science or let's say narrowly focused science journals on physiology or biomechanics. So maybe I should add one more thing to this, one more step, which is look at the figures, and especially look at the good figures. So one of the things that caught my eye about this study was this figure right here, which is fantastic. This is showing a slice of the tibia, and we can see, just like we learned last week, we've got the cortical bone out here, the trabecular bone in here, and by using high-resolution CT scans, which from 2 weeks ago, you know what that is, and doing those scans before and after spaceflight, these researchers were able to image which areas of the bone were resorbed and which areas of the bone were newly formed. So you went up into space, you were in space for a while, you came down, what parts of this bone went away and what parts are new? And that's shown in this purple and green here. So a good figure can really go a long ways towards making a paper understandable. And honestly, when I read papers like this, I don't spend too much time on these gigantic tables unless I have a really specific question that I'm looking for. So hopefully this gives you some insights into how you might be able to get useful information out of reading a study, even if you're not a technical expert on every single aspect of what was done. So even for me, for example, in this study, I'm pretty familiar with the biomechanics aspects of how to measure tibial bone strength, like this CT stuff right here. This is in my wheelhouse. But down here, where we've got all of these biochemical markers, that's outside my wheelhouse, and I don't understand most of all of these biochemistry things. So I just skim that, and I trust that the interpretation from the scientists who are expert in this is on when they describe their findings in here. Now, if you are a particular expert in some area, like say you're reading a study on powerlifting, and you're an expert powerlifter, you might want to read the methods in more detail, because you will have the necessary expertise to really analyze when they were analyzing this data. Did they do it the right way? So maybe you see a study on lifting, but you notice that all of the loads were only 30% of or 25% of 1 rep max. That might because you have some expert knowledge about appropriate lifting resistance volumes. You might be able to get further insights. But generally, I recommend following the steps that I outline here. Read the abstract in detail, read the introduction, skim the methods and results really quickly, and then jump right to the discussion. And then let's also put down, look at the figures, because the figures people such as me go out of their way to try to make the figures a really easily digestible way to understand the main findings of a paper. So hopefully you found this useful, and I'll give a specific introduction to the assignment that we'll be doing this week in the next video.